Case 1. David Ruiz was charged with murder in 2025 after authorities said he fatally stabbed 78-year-old Edward Aosta inside Acosta's home in San Antonio, Texas. Acosta was the founder of the Las Palapas restaurant chain, a business he spent decades building into a well-known name across the state. His death did not happen in public or during a robbery. It happened inside his own residence, and the details that later emerged made the case one of the most disturbing murder investigations in Texas that year. Edward Aosta was known as a quiet but determined businessman who remained closely tied to San Antonio even after achieving success. On July 1, 2025, what should have been a normal day ended in violence. According to police reports, a housekeeper was inside the home when the attack occurred. That housekeeper witnessed the stabbing and immediately contacted emergency services. Officers were dispatched to the residence within minutes. When they arrived, they found Aosta suffering from multiple stab wounds. Despite emergency efforts, he was pronounced dead. From the very beginning, investigators made it clear this was not a random crime. The attacker was someone Aosta knew. Attention quickly turned to David Ruiz, a family member identified as Acosta's nephew. Authorities said Ruiz had been present at or near the home around the time of the attack. After the stabbing, Ruiz left the scene. Law enforcement agencies were alerted, and a search was launched. Later that same day, Ruiz was located and arrested during a traffic stop in Kimball County, west of San Antonio. He was taken into custody without resistance and later transported back to Bezar County to face charges. As the investigation unfolded, more context came into focus. Edward Aosta was not only a homicide victim. He was a respected founder whose restaurants were familiar gathering places for families across Texas. News of his death spread quickly, and many people struggled to process how a man known for building a welcoming business could be killed inside his own home. The fact that a housekeeper witnessed the attack made the crime even more unsettling, underscoring how sudden and violent the encounter was. Police stated early on that there were no signs of forced entry. The stabbing occurred inside the residence, reinforcing the conclusion that this was a personal and targeted act. Investigators collected evidence from the home and interviewed witnesses, including the housekeeper who called for help. Based on that evidence, prosecutors moved forward with a murder charge against Ruiz. Court documents later confirmed that a grand jury reviewed the case and returned an indictment for murder, allowing the case to proceed toward trial. As the months passed, the focus shifted from the arrest to the courtroom. Ruiz remained in custody while pretrial proceedings continued. Prosecutors emphasized the seriousness of the charge, noting that murder under Texas law carries severe consequences. Defense filings suggested that Ruiz's mental condition before the incident might become part of the case, though prosecutors maintained that the evidence showed a deliberate act of violence. Throughout late 2025, hearings addressed procedural matters, evidence, and scheduling. While no definitive trial start date was immediately set, the presiding judge made it clear that the court intended to move the case forward. According to reports from court proceedings, the judge expressed an intention to begin the trial in early 2026, signaling that both sides were expected to be ready. That timeline became an important detail for both the prosecution and the defense, as well as for Acosta's family, who were waiting for answers and accountability. Public interest in the case remained high. Each new update brought renewed attention, not only because of the victim's prominence, but because of the circumstances. A housekeeper witnessing the attack, a suspect fleeing the scene, and an arrest hours later painted a clear and troubling timeline. Media coverage closely followed the case, carefully reporting verified details as they became available. If you'd love to see more murder documentaries on the channel, please support my channel by liking this video and subscribing. Thank you very much. Case 2. Eddy Betancourt, a respected Texas businessman and a gubernatorial appointee, when his life ended suddenly inside his own office in McAllen in 2025. Betancourt was known locally for his business work and statewide for his role in public service. On the day of the shooting, nothing suggested danger. Employees arrived expecting routine meetings and paperwork. Instead, a burst of gunfire inside the office building brought everything to a halt. By the time police arrived, Betancourt had been fatally shot, and a quiet business space had become the center of a major homicide investigation. Officers with the McAllen Police Department responded quickly, securing the scene and beginning interviews. Emergency medical personnel confirmed Betancourt had died from his injuries at the location. Investigators determined early on that the shooting was not random. Police described it as a targeted killing, carried out inside the office rather than in a public street or parking lot. That detail immediately raised concern among both business leaders and state officials, given Betancourt's public role and connections. Within days, authorities identified Randall Mata-Rios, age 60, as the primary suspect. According to law enforcement, Mata-Rios fled immediately after the shooting. Investigators later confirmed that he crossed into Mexico before officers were able to locate him. That development shifted the case from a local murder investigation into an international manhunt. State and federal agencies became involved, and cooperation with Mexican authorities was requested to assist in locating the suspect. Police also announced they were searching for a second man believed to have helped Mata-Rios escape. Authorities said this individual is suspected of assisting after the shooting, possibly involving transportation or planning that allowed the suspect to leave the country. As of the latest confirmed updates, this second person has not been publicly identified, and no arrest has been announced. Investigators stressed that aiding a fugitive is a serious criminal offense and urged anyone with information to come forward. The flight across the border added urgency to the case. Texas Department of Public Safety officials and federal partners worked alongside local police to track movements and review surveillance footage, license plate data, and border records. Despite those efforts, Mata-Rios remained at large months after the killing. Law enforcement confirmed repeatedly that he was still wanted and that the investigation remained active. Officials cautioned the public against spreading rumors, noting that only verified tips could help move the case forward. As news spread, Betancourt's death sent shockwaves through South Texas. Business owners expressed concern about workplace safety, while political leaders reacted to the loss of a governor's appointee. Betancourt's appointment placed him in a position of trust within the state government, which increased public attention and scrutiny. Authorities were careful, however, to avoid speculating about motive. Police stated clearly that while the attack appeared deliberate, they had not released information explaining why Betancourt was targeted. That lack of a confirmed motive led to public questions, but investigators emphasized that homicide cases often require time to piece together relationships, timelines, and intent. Law enforcement said evidence collection continued long after the initial crime scene work, including financial records, phone data, and witness statements. Officials warned that premature conclusions could harm the investigation or unfairly affect those involved. The case also highlighted how quickly a crime can cross borders. Once Mata-Rios entered Mexico, jurisdictional limits complicated the search. Extradition processes depend on international cooperation and legal standards in both countries. Authorities explained that even when a suspect is identified, capture is not immediate, especially when international boundaries are involved. This reality left Betancourt's family and the public facing uncertainty, with no clear timeline for an arrest. Months later, the case remained unresolved. Police continued to issue reminders that Mata-Rios was wanted and considered dangerous. They also reiterated that the search for the alleged accomplice was ongoing. Each update reinforced the same message. The investigation was active, but progress depended on credible information, not online speculation. At the state level, officials acknowledged the seriousness of the case while maintaining distance from the investigation itself. Law enforcement agencies made clear that Betancourt's public role did not change the legal standards guiding the case. The focus remained on evidence, suspects, and due process. Authorities avoided releasing sensitive details that could compromise future arrests or court proceedings. As time passed, public attention faded from headlines, but the case did not close. Investigators continued to follow leads, review tips, and coordinate with other agencies. Law enforcement confirmed that, As of the most recent verified reports, Reinaldo Mata-Rios had not been captured and remained wanted in connection with the shooting. The second suspect believed to have helped with the escape was also still being sought. Case 3. Joshua John became the focus of one of the most disturbing and complex murder cases in Texas in 2025 after authorities determined he carried out a rooftop shooting aimed at a U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement field office in Dallas. What followed was not a spontaneous act of violence. Investigators described it as a deliberate and carefully prepared attack shaped by ideology, fixation, and severe, untreated mental health struggles. The shooting unfolded in just minutes, yet it claimed 2 lives, seriously injured another person, and triggered a federal response that continues to influence security planning. The attack occurred on September 24, 2025, during normal daytime operations at the Dallas ICE field office. Investigators confirmed that Jan accessed the roof of an adjacent building overlooking the facility's sally port, the secured area used to move detainees between vehicles and the building. From that elevated position, he had a direct downward view into a space where ICE agents routinely worked, and detainees were briefly exposed. Authorities said this vantage point was chosen intentionally, giving John concealment and a clear line of sight into a controlled area below. Federal investigators confirmed that John was armed with an 8mm bolt-action rifle, which had been legally purchased in August 2025. From the rooftop, he fired multiple rounds toward the ICE facility. 3 detainees were struck by gunfire. Norlin Guzman Fuentes, a 37-year-old national of El Salvador, was pronounced dead at the scene. Miguel Ángel Garcia Hernández, a 32-year-old Mexican national and father of 4, was critically wounded and later died on September 30, 2025, after being removed from life support. A third detainee, José Andrés Bordones Molina of Venezuela, was also hit by gunfire and survived. Authorities emphasized that no ICE agents were physically struck, a fact that became central to understanding both John's intent and the tragic outcome. Inside the facility, emergency procedures were activated almost immediately. ICE personnel secured detainees and sheltered staff as Dallas police and federal agents converged on the area. Streets were shut down, nearby buildings were locked down, and officers worked to locate the shooter's position. Within a short time, law enforcement traced the gunfire to the rooftop. Officials later confirmed that Joshua John died at the scene from a self-inflicted gunshot wound, ending the immediate threat. With the shooter deceased, the investigation shifted from prosecution to understanding how the attack was planned and how it unfolded. As federal authorities released more information, the depth of John's preparation became clearer. Investigators said John had searched for smartphone applications specifically designed to identify or locate ICE agents and had downloaded a list of Department of Homeland Security facilities months in advance. These findings, officials said, demonstrated that the attack was not impulsive. Instead, it was the result of planning, research, and fixation on federal immigration enforcement. During a press conference on September 25, 2025, Nancy Larson, the acting U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Texas, described the outcome as a tragic irony. She explained that evidence showed John intended to harm ICE agents, yet the people struck were detainees, individuals who could not escape and depended entirely on the government for protection. Investigators said this conclusion was supported by materials recovered from the scene and from John's personal effects. Notes and writings reflected hostility toward ICE as an institution and an intent to cause maximum harm. Federal officials stressed that the language used, combined with the choice of location and timing, showed the attack was targeted and ideological, not random. Another critical layer of the investigation involved John's mental health. Post-incident reports released in October 2025 confirmed that he suffered from severe mental health disturbances, including persistent delusions. Investigators said John believed he had radiation sickness and was allergic to plastic. Mental health professionals consulted by authorities explained that such beliefs can significantly distort perception, intensify paranoia, and deepen fixation when left untreated. Officials were careful to emphasize that mental illness alone does not cause violence and that most people with psychiatric conditions are not dangerous. In John's case, however, investigators concluded that untreated delusions combined with ideological hostility toward ICE created a volatile and dangerous situation. The deaths of Norlan Guzman Fuentes and Miguel Angel Garcia Hernandez became the most painful consequences of the attack. Both men were under government custody at the time of the shooting. In the days following the tragedy, advocate groups and family members stated that Miguel Angel Garcia Hernandez had been trying to shield another detainee when he was struck by gunfire. While authorities have not independently verified every detail of that account, officials acknowledged that it was widely reported and underscored the vulnerability of detainees during external attacks. Because John died at the scene, there would be no criminal trial. Instead, federal agencies conducted a comprehensive review of security procedures. Investigators examined rooftop access near sensitive facilities, surveillance blind spots, and the exposure of transport areas. Officials said lessons from the Dallas ICE shooting would be applied to future security planning across federal facilities. Don't forget to smash the like button and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for your support. Case 4. Anakin Harrison and Jacob McCormick became the focus of one of the most closely followed murder cases in Texas in 2025, after a drive-by shooting in Randall County turned a quiet home into the center of a deadly investigation. The case did not begin as a homicide. It began with gunfire echoing through a residential area, 6 people trapped inside a house, and a woman critically injured while doctors fought to keep her alive. What followed was a fast-moving investigation that uncovered planning, prior threats, and a level of violence that stunned even experienced prosecutors. The shooting happened on the morning of July 3, 2025, along Double D Road near Tanglewood Drive. According to investigators, a gold Chevy Suburban from the 1990s drove past the residence and slowed. Surveillance audio later revealed what happened next in exact detail. At 7:19 a.m., the first burst of gunfire erupted. Approximately 24 shots were fired in rapid succession. About 1 minute later, a second round followed, with another 25 shots discharged. In total, 49 rounds were fired into and toward the home. Inside the house were 6 people, including Kryst'shun Harris. One of the bullets struck Harris in the head, leaving her in critical condition. Deputies rushed to the scene as neighbors called 911. Shell casings covered the roadway. The home showed extensive damage from the gunfire. From the beginning, investigators said the number of shots fired made one thing clear: this was not careless firing or celebratory gunfire. The home had been directly targeted. Every person inside had been placed in extreme danger in a matter of seconds. Kryst'shun Harris was rushed to the hospital, where she remained in critical condition for days. At that stage, the case was classified as aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Detectives worked around the clock, gathering surveillance footage, interviewing witnesses, and analyzing audio recordings. As they spoke with the occupants of the home, an important detail emerged. One of the people inside reported that they had previously been threatened by Anakin Harrison. That statement immediately shifted the direction of the investigation. Prosecutors would later rely on it to argue that the shooting was planned and targeted, not random. Evidence soon pointed investigators toward Anakin Harrison and Jacob McCormick. Court records later identified Harrison as the driver of the gold Chevy Suburban used in the attack. Law enforcement tracked Harrison to an apartment complex on South Spring Street, where his arrest unfolded over several tense hours. Tactical officers surrounded the location, and a SWAT standoff followed. Eventually, Harrison was taken into custody without shots being fired. Jacob McCormick was arrested 5 days later in a separate operation as detectives continued building their case. As both men sat in custody, the condition of Kryst'shun Harris remained uncertain. Her family waited for updates, hoping she might recover. Then, on July 15, 2025, Harris died from her injuries. Her death marked a turning point in the case. Prosecutors formally upgraded the charges against both Harrison and McCormick from aggravated assault to murder. The announcement sent shockwaves through Randall County, turning what had already been a disturbing case into a full homicide investigation. With the upgraded charges, prosecutors began preparing the case for grand jury review. Investigators focused on several key elements: the 2 separate bursts of gunfire, the 49 shot total, the 6 people inside the home, the prior threat reported by one occupant, and the use of a motor vehicle as part of the attack. Each detail strengthened the argument that the shooting showed extreme disregard for human life. On September 24, 2025, a Randall County grand jury returned formal indictments against Anakin Harrison and Jacob McCormick. The indictment included murder charges as well as a specific count of aggravated assault in a motor vehicle, discharging a firearm recklessly at a habitation. Prosecutors emphasized that firing dozens of rounds into an occupied home met the legal standard for recklessness at the highest level. The indictment confirmed that the case would move forward toward trial. Case 5. Leonard Frank Reagan spent decades working in city government, helping communities function and grow. He served as McKinney's city manager and previously held senior administrative roles as an assistant and deputy city manager in Aurora, Colorado. His career focused on planning, public accountability, and steady leadership. In late December 2025, that long record of public service was overshadowed by a private tragedy that unfolded quietly inside his own home. Frank Reagan and his wife, Jackie Reagan, were found dead in their McKinney, Texas residence, a discovery that quickly became one of the most disturbing murder cases in Texas in 2025. Concern began with silence. Family members became worried after they were unable to reach Frank and Jackie Reagan. On Saturday night, December 27, 2025, a relative contacted McKinney police and requested a welfare check. Officers responded to the home, examined the exterior, and assessed the situation. From outside, there were no obvious signs of danger or forced entry. With no legal justification to enter the residence, officers documented the visit and cleared the call. By the next morning, the concern had not gone away. On Sunday, December 28th, police were called back to the same address. This time, officers determined there was sufficient cause to enter the home. They forced entry through the back door and began clearing the residence. Inside the living room, officers made a grim discovery. Frank and Jackie Reagan were found deceased. Both were pronounced dead at the scene. Investigators quickly determined that the deaths were not accidental. According to official reports, both victims had suffered fatal stab wounds. The home was secured, and the case was immediately classified as a double homicide. Detectives began processing the scene, collecting evidence, and reconstructing the timeline of events. There were no indications of a random intruder or burglary. Everything about the scene suggested the violence occurred inside the home and involved someone known to the victims. As officers continued clearing the house for safety, the situation escalated further. Inside a bedroom, police encountered the couple's adult son, Bryce Reagan. Early and varied reports described him as armed with a firearm, and some initial coverage used the general terms handgun or firearm. Later, official statements from law enforcement clarified that the weapon was a long gun. Officers issued commands, but Bryce did not comply. Police then fired their weapons, striking him. He survived the encounter and was transported to a hospital, where he was treated for injuries described as non-life-threatening. Because officers discharged their weapons, a separate legal process was immediately triggered. The Texas Rangers opened an independent investigation into the officer-involved shooting, which is standard procedure in Texas whenever police use deadly force. This investigation focuses solely on whether officers acted within policy and law during the encounter. It runs independently from the homicide case and does not determine guilt or innocence related to the murders themselves. After receiving medical treatment, Bryce Reagan was released into custody. Law enforcement identified him as 34 years old, an age consistently cited by McKinney police and local authorities, despite one early report briefly listing a different age. Prosecutors formally charged him with capital murder, a charge that applies under Texas law when more than one person is intentionally killed during the same criminal episode. He was also charged with 3 counts of aggravated assault on a public servant, stemming from the confrontation with officers inside the home. Authorities have been deliberate in their public messaging about motive. As of early January 2026, law enforcement has confirmed that no official motive has been established. Investigators have stated that the case will be based on physical evidence, forensic findings, and facts presented in court, rather than speculation. While public discussion has focused heavily on possible explanations, police have emphasized that motive determination is a legal process and has not yet been concluded. At the same time, family members have spoken publicly. Jackie Reagan's brother posted on social media that Bryce Reagan had struggled with mental health issues as an adult. Law enforcement has acknowledged awareness of these statements, but has been clear that they do not represent an official finding and are not being treated as a confirmed motive. Authorities have drawn a firm line between family commentary and evidence that will ultimately be evaluated in court. The background of the victims deepened the impact of the case. Frank Reagan was known in municipal government circles as an experienced administrator who worked behind the scenes to keep cities running. His tenure in McKinney and earlier work in Aurora placed him in positions that required difficult decisions and long hours, but little public attention. Jackie Reagan lived largely outside the spotlight, known to friends and relatives as private and devoted. Their deaths were not connected to Frank Reagan's professional life, yet his public service caused the tragedy to resonate far beyond the family. As the investigation continued, McKinney city officials released statements offering condolences while urging the public not to speculate. Prosecutors began preparing the case for court, while defense attorneys initiated their response. Pre-trial proceedings were expected to continue into 2026. Meanwhile, the Texas Rangers continued their independent review of the officer-involved shooting, a process that can take months to complete. Case 6. Austin Metcalf was 17 years old when a high school track meet in Frisco, Texas, turned deadly in the spring of 2025. The event was held at David Kuykendall Stadium, a venue commonly used for school athletics across the Frisco Independent School District. On April 2, 2025, students from multiple schools gathered for competition, with tents set up around the field for teams to shelter from the weather. That afternoon, the meet was interrupted by a rain delay, forcing athletes and spectators to wait under temporary coverings as officials paused the events. It was during this rain delay that the confrontation began. According to investigative reports later referenced in court filings, the dispute allegedly started when Metcalf approached another student who was sitting inside a tent assigned to Frisco Memorial High School, the school Metcalf attended. Witness accounts cited by police state that Metcalf asked the student to move out of the tent so his team could use the space. What followed was a brief but tense exchange. Within moments, the disagreement escalated into violence. Police say Metcalf was stabbed during the altercation, in proximity to other students who were waiting out the delay. Panic spread quickly. Coaches and staff called for help, and emergency responders were dispatched to the stadium. Despite life-saving efforts, Metcalf died later that day from his injuries. A school athletic event meant to showcase teamwork and youth instead became the site of a fatal crime, witnessed by peers who were expecting nothing more than a delayed race schedule. Law enforcement arrested Carmelo Anthony, who was also 17 at the time. Authorities said Anthony was taken into custody shortly after the incident. According to police statements and later court filings, Anthony allegedly admitted to stabbing Metcalf during questioning. Because Texas law treats 17-year-olds as adults in criminal court, the case was immediately transferred to the adult system rather than juvenile court. In June 2025, a Collin County grand jury indicted Anthony on a charge of first-degree murder. Prosecutors said the evidence presented met the threshold required for the charge. A trial date was later scheduled for June 2026, setting the legal timeline for one of the most closely watched youth homicide cases in Texas that year. As of early 2026, the presiding judge placed the case under a strict gag order, prohibiting attorneys, law enforcement, and involved parties from making public statements that could influence potential jurors or affect the fairness of the trial. That gag order has remained in place, sharply limiting the release of new details. Officials have repeatedly stated that this restriction is meant to preserve the integrity of the legal process, especially given the extraordinary level of public attention. The order applies to prosecutors, defense attorneys, investigators, and witnesses, meaning that verified updates are limited to formal court filings and scheduled hearings. The absence of frequent official updates did not slow public interest. Instead, it created an environment where misinformation spread rapidly, particularly on social media platforms. One of the most serious incidents involved impersonation. Investigators confirmed that a fake social media account was created to impersonate Frisco Police Chief David Shilson. That account circulated a fabricated autopsy report, falsely claiming to describe Metcalf's injuries and the circumstances of his death. The post went viral, accumulating millions of views before authorities intervened. Police quickly clarified that the autopsy report was not real and warned the public that no official findings had been released at that time. Despite these corrections, screenshots and reposts continued to circulate, embedding false information into online discussions. Law enforcement described the impersonation as both dangerous and deeply harmful, noting that it misled the public while adding pain to an already devastating situation. The case also became entangled in racial and social tensions far beyond Frisco. External groups with no direct connection to the family's organized protests and online campaigns that framed the killing through broader political narratives. In response, Metcalf's father made public statements rejecting those interpretations. He stated clearly that his son's death was not about race and condemned attempts to use the tragedy to promote division or unrelated agendas. He asked the public to respect the facts and allow the legal process to proceed without distortion. As misinformation spread, both families became targets of harassment. Law enforcement confirmed that the Metcalf family experienced repeated online abuse, including multiple swatting incidents, in which false emergency calls were made to their home. Each call required armed police to respond under the assumption that lives were in danger. Authorities described these acts as criminal and reckless, compounding trauma for a family already coping with loss. The Anthony family also faced harassment, threats, and public attacks online. Much of this harassment was driven by unverified claims, edited videos, and false narratives that circulated outside of any official legal context. Officials emphasized that harassment of either family had no place in the justice process and warned that spreading false information could result in criminal consequences. Beyond the personal impact, the case reignited discussion about youth violence, bail law, and pretrial publicity in Texas. Legal experts explained that bail decisions in serious felony cases are governed by statute and judicial discretion, not public opinion. Others noted that gag orders, while sometimes controversial, are commonly used in high-profile cases to protect the right to a fair trial. Within Frisco schools, the effects were immediate. Security measures at athletic events were reviewed and strengthened. Counselors were made available to students who witnessed the stabbing or learned about it through classmates. Administrators acknowledged the difficulty of restoring a sense of safety after violence occurred in a space associated with school pride and student achievement. As the trial approaches, officials continue to stress that facts will be decided in court, not online. The killing of Austin Metcalf remains a case shaped by tragedy, youth, and the modern reality of instant information. One brief confrontation during a rain delay led to a permanent loss. What followed showed how quickly truth can be overshadowed by rumor and why restraint matters when justice is still unfolding. Case 7. Robert Kenny Knox and Narya Hilesta. Inez Hayes became the focus of one of the most closely examined mass shooting cases in Texas in 2025, after a confrontation connected to a night out in Amarillo escalated into gunfire on a busy city street. The case began on January 26, 2025 outside a downtown nightclub, and it continued through arrests, upgraded charges, indictments, and custody changes that kept the prosecution active throughout 2025 and into 2026. The shooting occurred outside Bodegas, also known as Chesney's, a nightclub located on Polk Street in Amarillo, Texas. According to police, the sequence of events began earlier inside the bar, where an argument broke out involving flirting with women. Officers later stated that the interaction angered the suspects and created tension that did not end when people exited the club. By the time the dispute moved outside, a crowd had gathered near the entrance and along the sidewalk, a common scene late at night in the area. Investigators with the Amarillo Police Department said that shortly after leaving the club, a vehicle associated with the suspects stopped near the entrance. Police reports state that Robert Kenny Knox exited the vehicle carrying an AR-style pistol. According to investigators, Knox then opened fire toward the crowd standing on the sidewalk and near the doorway. Authorities later confirmed that exactly 15 rounds were discharged in rapid succession, striking multiple people in seconds. The sudden gunfire caused immediate panic. Witnesses described people running in different directions, while others fell after being hit. When officers arrived, they found victims spread across the exterior of the club and nearby sidewalk. Emergency medical responders rushed the wounded to hospitals across Amarillo. Police later confirmed that 9 people were struck by gunfire during the shooting. One victim, John Love Luima, died from his injuries, while 8 others survived, some with serious gunshot wounds that required extensive medical treatment. As officers secured the scene, investigators began reconstructing what had happened. Shell casings were recovered from the sidewalk and roadway, and surveillance footage from nearby businesses was reviewed. Witness interviews consistently placed Knox outside the vehicle, firing toward the crowd. Police also identified Naria Hilesta Inez Hayes as being involved in the events surrounding the shooting, leading to his arrest as the investigation progressed. Investigators also confirmed that there was a third person inside the vehicle at the time of the shooting. Police arrested Britt Brinson Cave, who had been a passenger in the car. However, authorities later determined that Cave played no role in planning or carrying out the shooting. He was not charged in connection with the gunfire and instead faced only a public intoxication charge, which was unrelated to the acts of violence. Police emphasized that Cave's arrest should not be interpreted as evidence of participation in the shooting itself. In the immediate aftermath, Knox and Hayes were taken into custody. At first, prosecutors filed initial charges of deadly conduct involving the discharge of a firearm, a step that allowed the case to move forward while investigators continued collecting evidence. Those charges did not remain in place for long. As police reviewed ballistic evidence, surveillance footage, and witness statements, the scope of the case expanded. By late January 2025, prosecutors upgraded the charges. Robert Kenny Knox and Naria Hilesta Inez Hayes were each charged with murder in connection with the death of John Love Luima. In addition, prosecutors filed multiple counts of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, 1 count for each of the 8 surviving gunshot victims. Under Texas law, each injured person supports a separate charge, reflecting the number of people harmed during the incident. The case advanced further in February 2025 when a Potter County grand jury returned formal indictments against both men. Those indictments locked in the upgraded charges and formally moved the case toward trial. Prosecutors stated that the evidence showed gunfire was intentionally directed into a crowd outside a public venue, a factor that weighed heavily in charging decisions. Throughout 2025, the prosecution remained active, with court hearings addressing bond, custody, and procedural matters. In July 2025, Robert Kenny Knox was transferred to the Lubbock County Jail. Jail officials cited safety and security reasons for the move, a measure sometimes taken in high-profile cases involving serious charges. Knox remained in custody following the transfer. That same month, Naria Hilesta Inez Hayes was released on bond. Court records show that his release came with strict monitoring and supervision conditions. Hayes remained subject to court oversight as prosecutors continued preparing for trial. Unlike many violent crime cases, police in this investigation did identify a motive publicly. Authorities stated that the shooting stemmed from the earlier confrontation inside the bar involving flirting with women. According to investigators, the argument inside the club escalated after the parties separated, culminating in gunfire outside. Police have consistently described the shooting as the final escalation of a dispute that began indoors and ended on the street. As the case moved into 2026, both Knox and Hayes continued to face murder and aggravated assault charges, with no plea agreement or trial verdict yet reached. Prosecutors indicated they intend to rely on eyewitness testimony, surveillance video, ballistic evidence confirming the use of an AR-style pistol, and the established timeline linking the bar altercation to the shooting outside. Case 8. Leon Goodman was 19 years old when his name became permanently linked to one of the most devastating murder cases to unfold in Texas in 2025. The violence did not erupt during a robbery or a random street encounter. Instead, it happened late at night in Beaumont, Texas, at an apartment complex where the people involved knew each other and believed they were safe. What followed was a rapid chain of events that ended with a young father dead and two teenagers facing the weight of the criminal justice system. According to police reports and court records cited by local Texas media, the shooting occurred shortly after 11:30 p.m. at the Northridge Manor Apartments on Maida Road. Residents reported hearing multiple gunshots, prompting emergency calls to police, while some dispatch logs later showed notifications and radio traffic continuing as late as 11:52 p.m. Investigators clarified that those later timestamps reflected dispatcher advisories and response coordination. The shooting itself happened earlier, in a brief and violent moment that detectives later worked to reconstruct minute by minute. A critical turning point in the investigation came from a credible eyewitness. Police stated that the witness told investigators they saw two individuals fire gunshots at the victim. That account immediately shaped the direction of the case, confirming the shooting was deliberate and involved more than one suspect. Authorities have stated the killing does not appear random, though they have not publicly identified a specific motive as the case continues through the courts. The victim was later identified as Kryst'shun Burkett, a 17-year-old aspiring rapper and the father of a 10-month-old daughter. Family members described Burkett as creative, motivated, and deeply focused on his role as a parent. In interviews with local outlets, including 12 News Now, relatives emphasized that Burkett knew the suspects and considered them friends. They said he was simply visiting the apartment complex that night and had no reason to believe he was in danger. The family also strongly rejected speculation that the shooting was gang-related. They told reporters there was no ongoing feud, no known dispute, and no warning signs that violence was about to erupt. That detail shifted public understanding of the case. Rather than a clash between rivals or strangers, the shooting appeared to stem from a setting where familiarity and trust were present, making the outcome even more painful for those left behind. After Burkett was shot, people at the scene rushed him into a vehicle in a desperate attempt to save his life. That effort ended minutes later in the 2800 block of Calder Avenue, near the emergency room entrance of Christus St. Elizabeth Hospital. Police confirmed that the vehicle collided with responding patrol units as officers converged on the area. Burkett was found in the back seat suffering from gunshot wounds. Despite emergency medical intervention, he was pronounced dead. As detectives worked backward through the timeline, evidence quickly pointed to Leon Goodman, who was 19 years old at the time. Police later charged Goodman with murder, citing eyewitness testimony, scene evidence, and investigative findings. Authorities confirmed that a second suspect, a 16-year-old juvenile, was also involved in the shooting. By January 1, 2026, police announced that the juvenile had been apprehended and charged, confirming that both alleged shooters were now in custody. One of the most significant factors in the case was Goodman's legal status at the time of the shooting. Court records show that Goodman was on felony probation when the gunfire erupted. Probation is intended to reduce repeat offenses through supervision and strict conditions. In this case, investigators allege those safeguards failed with fatal consequences. Prosecutors highlighted Goodman's probation status early in court proceedings, describing it as an aggravating factor. During Goodman's initial bond hearing, a magistrate reviewed the murder charge, the eyewitness account describing two shooters, and Goodman's probation status. The judge set bond at $1.5 million, citing the seriousness of the offense and concerns about public safety. Goodman was booked into the Jefferson County Jail, where he has remained. As of January 6, 2026, jail records confirm that Leon Goodman is still in custody, with the bond unchanged as the case moves through the pretrial phase. Police have emphasized that although the two primary suspects are now in custody, the investigation remains technically ongoing. Authorities have explained that this designation reflects standard procedure in a multi-suspect homicide case. Detectives continue reviewing evidence, witness statements, and forensic findings to ensure all details are fully resolved and to determine whether any additional parties were involved or whether other contributing factors played a role. Officials have stressed that the ongoing status of the investigation does not signal uncertainty about the charges already filed. From a legal standpoint, the case carries multiple layers of complexity. Prosecutors are expected to rely heavily on eyewitness testimony, ballistic analysis, and scene reconstruction. The involvement of a juvenile defendant introduces additional legal considerations, including separate court processes. Goodman's probation status may also affect sentencing if he is convicted, as probation violations can lead to enhanced penalties under Texas law. Case 9, Aidan Hunt became the focus of one of Austin's most disturbing homicide investigations of 2025 after police determined that a violent death inside a shared apartment was followed by a calculated effort to dispose of a body in public. The case involving 63-year-old Robert Wentworth did not emerge through a missing person report or a neighbor's complaint. It came to light only after a cardboard box was discovered behind a bus stop in South Austin, a discovery that forced investigators to reconstruct what had happened days earlier inside a private residence. On the afternoon of Wednesday, November 13, 2025, officers with the Austin Police Department were dispatched to 4107 Victory Drive at approximately 5:22 p.m. following a call about a suspicious box placed behind a bus stop. When officers arrived, they located a large cardboard box positioned out of immediate view. Inside was the body of an adult male. Austin Travis County EMS responded, but the man was pronounced dead at 5:53 p.m. The victim was later identified as Robert Wentworth, who lived only a short distance from where his body was found. As detectives began piecing together Wentworth's background, they quickly learned he shared an apartment nearby with Aidan Hunt, a 24-year-old man more than 30 years younger. That discovery immediately narrowed the investigation. Hunt was identified as the person who had the most recent and sustained contact with Wentworth, and attention shifted to the apartment they shared and to the nature of their relationship in the days leading up to the killing. Investigators obtained a search warrant for the apartment and conducted a detailed forensic examination. According to the arrest affidavit, detectives documented significant blood evidence in the kitchen area, including staining inconsistent with a minor injury. When questioned about the blood, Hunt reportedly told detectives that he may have pricked his finger. Investigators noted that this explanation did not align with the volume or distribution of blood observed at the scene, and it was recorded as part of the evidence presented in support of the murder charge. The affidavit also revealed important admissions made by Hunt during questioning. He told detectives that he and Wentworth had been involved in multiple physical altercations in the past. In one incident, Hunt admitted, he struck Wentworth hard enough to give him a black eye. These statements established a documented history of violence between the two men and provided investigators with context for what they believed escalated inside the apartment. While the blood evidence suggested a violent encounter, the official cause of death was later confirmed through an autopsy. According to medical examiners' findings referenced in court records, Robert Wentworth died from blunt force trauma to the head and neck. Investigators concluded that these injuries were consistent with a physical assault rather than an accident. The autopsy results became a critical piece of the case, linking the violence suggested by the scene inside the apartment to the fatal outcome. To determine when and how Wentworth's body was moved, detectives turned to surveillance footage from nearby locations. Video reviewed by investigators showed that the cardboard box was placed behind the bus stop sometime between Wednesday night, November 12th, and the early morning hours of Thursday, November 13th. This narrowed time frame was crucial. It indicated that the killing occurred earlier and that the body was transported and abandoned hours later rather than immediately after death. Surveillance analysis also supported investigators' belief that the person responsible was familiar with the area. The short distance between the apartment and the bus stop suggested the body was moved quickly and deliberately, without the use of a vehicle. Prosecutors later pointed to this detail as evidence that the location was chosen for convenience, not chance. Detectives also uncovered a key physical link tying the apartment directly to the box containing Wentworth's body. According to the arrest affidavit, investigators matched identifying lot numbers on other cardboard boxes found inside the apartment to the specific box recovered at the bus stop. This detail strengthened the connection between the residence and the disposal site, directly undermining any claim that the box came from an unrelated source. With forensic evidence, surveillance timing, and Hunt's own statements documented, authorities moved to make an arrest. On November 16, 2025, Hunt was located and taken into custody by members of the Lone Star Fugitive Task Force, working alongside Austin police. Officials stated that the arrest occurred without resistance. Hunt was booked into the Travis County Jail and formally charged with murder, with bond set at $100,000. In court filings, prosecutors outlined the core elements of the case: the blunt force injuries identified in the autopsy, the blood evidence inside the apartment, Hunt's explanation for that blood, his admissions of prior physical violence toward Wentworth, the surveillance footage narrowing the disposal window, and the cardboard box lot numbers tying the scene of the killing to the body's location. Authorities emphasized that the case was built on how these details fit together, rather than on a single piece of evidence. Police have not publicly identified a specific motive, and the arrest affidavit does not assign the killing to one triggering event. Instead, investigators described a pattern of conflict that escalated into fatal violence. As the case proceeds through the Texas court system, Hunt remains in custody. No trial date has yet been announced, and defense attorneys have not publicly addressed the evidence outlined in the affidavit. Case 10. Renee Hooper, the central figure in a Bexar County homicide investigation on Christmas Eve, December 24, 2025, after authorities say a domestic dispute inside a private home ended with a fatal gunshot. By the end of that night, Hooper was under arrest, charged with murder in the death of her partner, Everisto Gomez Jr, 42, a case that investigators say was shaped by a specific motive: video evidence, a long history of domestic calls to the address, and the presence of children inside the home. Deputies with the Bexar County Sheriff's Office were dispatched to the residence in Bexar County, Texas, after receiving a report of a shooting on the evening of December 24th. When first responders arrived, they found Gomez suffering from a gunshot wound. Despite emergency medical efforts, he was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner later ruled the official cause of death as a gunshot wound to the chest, confirming that the injury was fatal and consistent with the evidence observed by deputies inside the home. From the outset, investigators identified the shooting as a domestic incident. Renee Hooper was inside the residence at the time and was detained by responding deputies. Authorities also confirmed that at least 2 children were inside the home when the gun was fired. While the children were not physically injured, officials described their presence as a serious and disturbing factor, noting that the violence unfolded in a family setting rather than in isolation. As detectives began reconstructing what led up to the shooting, they identified a specific motive that had not been publicly detailed at first. According to contemporary reports cited by law enforcement, the fatal argument centered on a dispute over a car and a cell phone. Investigators say the disagreement escalated quickly, turning a domestic argument into a deadly confrontation. Authorities have emphasized that while arguments can be common in strained relationships, this one ended with the use of a firearm, a decision that permanently changed multiple lives. The investigation also revealed that the Christmas Eve shooting was not an isolated event at that address. Sheriff's officials confirmed there was an extensive history of prior domestic-related disturbance calls associated with the residence. Deputies had responded to the home multiple times before December 24th for conflicts involving the adults who lived there. While none of those earlier calls resulted in serious injuries or deaths, investigators said the pattern of repeated disturbances provided important context for understanding how the situation escalated on the holiday. One of the most critical pieces of evidence in the case came from Hooper herself. Authorities confirmed that she voluntarily provided security camera footage from inside the home, telling investigators that the video would exonerate her. However, after reviewing the footage, investigators reached the opposite conclusion. Javier Salazar later stated publicly that the video actually made Hooper appear more culpable, showing a disturbance and confrontation leading up to the fatal shooting. While the footage has not been released publicly, sheriff's officials said it directly contradicted any claim that the shooting was accidental or occurred without prior conflict. Following her arrest, Renee Hooper was booked into the Bexar County Jail on a $150,000 bond, according to jail records. Prosecutors filed a murder charge based on the medical examiner's findings, the video evidence, and statements collected at the scene. Authorities also disclosed that the case may not be limited to a single charge. During the investigation, deputies discovered narcotics inside the home, and Sheriff Salazar indicated that Hooper could face additional drug-related charges as the case continues through the court system. The presence of drugs added another layer to the investigation, prompting further analysis by law enforcement. While those potential charges had not yet been formally filed at the time of the initial booking, officials confirmed that the evidence was being reviewed and could result in additional counts beyond murder. Authorities stressed that all charging decisions would ultimately be determined through the legal process. As of when this video was uploaded, the case remained active, with Hooper awaiting further court proceedings. Prosecutors continued preparing their case, which they say will rely on the security video, the autopsy ruling, the documented domestic call history at the residence, and evidence recovered during the search of the home. Like all defendants, Hooper is presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty in court. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe to my channel.